Boy, oh boy, it's good to be back once again.
It sure is.
History or His Story. Another week, another episode. Panda Brand, how you doing?
Oh boy, am I doing good. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I am an 11.
Wow, that was a really interesting radio voice.
I'm not going to do a radio voice. However, I will tell you, I'm fine. I'm still reeling from last week's episode.
Nelly and the hen.
I feel like I've made peace with it.
You seem like you're in a very pensive mood.
I am, because, and I think that this podcast brings it out in me, Dan.
It does. It makes you want to go study the history.
It makes me...
And I would say, don't do tomorrow what you could do today.
I think it's don't put off for tomorrow what could be done today.
Who's the quote boy in the room? I don't know. It was a genuine question. I know.
On this podcast, aside from some fun, witty banter like you just witnessed, we also have a little bit of a game show where I tell these gents 3 stories from history. They're usually themed in some form or fashion, and one of those stories is a lie. It's a fib.
You might say it's your story.
It's his story. And so these guys have to hear the 3 stories. They get 3 minutes of questions for each story, and then they get a little bit of time to confer with each other, and they give their best guess. And at this point, we've done 5 episodes or something.
Yeah,
Panda has gotten 2 right. Brand has gotten 1 right.
Technically, I have gotten 2 right. I want to make that perfectly clear.
But you didn't.
I didn't.
No.
So 1 right.
And now you have said you're going to go on a streak.
I want to go on a streak now.
You
until
promised to
Christmas.
not miss one from here to Christmas.
From here till Christmas. And so I'm feeling good about that. And I would just like to thank my mom and everybody back home for believing in me. And
that's usually what you do after you accomplish
I've already
the streak.
accomplished it. That's how sure
in your
of it I am.
head. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, can I thank somebody?
Please, go for it. We're doing shout-outs. Go for it.
I'd like to thank all the people who I had to step on to get here.
That's right. It was a lengthy application process.
It was.
And you killed a few people.
I did. I really did. And metaphorically.
Of course. Metaphorically, I'm the man.
You ran their name through the mud so bad they wished they were dead.
Right. I did a little muckraking.
Yeah. That's not what that means.
No.
But
that's from history.
That is from history.
His story.
And if you like what you've heard so far and want to continue to listen, please feel free. Rate, review, like, subscribe, all those great things. On the socials, we're at His Story Podcast, at His Story Podcast. On the lines, we're at historyorhisstory.com. Check us out.
Can
Please
you believe
leave us
that
a
domain
review.
wasn't taken? Can you believe it?
Can you believe
Just
it?
unbelievable.
It's such an obvious one, and
Yeah,
we
I
did
know.
it. Not enough S's.
Not enough S's.
In those words.
Just aren't.
All right, should we go ahead and crank it up? We're sorry about the footsie.
I don't.
We actually hit each other's foot at the same time, and and then we locked eyes, and it was a weird.
That's a new song. Sorry about the footsie, and we'll play it maybe at the end. of the
That's
episode.
actually in one of these stories.
Sorry about the footsie. We're sorry. Sorry about the footsie.
You guys ready to do this?
Yeah.
Man.
Awesome. So here's what happens. I give you 3 stories, the titles, and then you guys get to tell me which one, the order you'd like to hear them.
What's the time period?
This theme's a little different. It's a little bit of a curveball. Do we have that curveball theme queued up? Curveball. Curveball. All right. I hope that was good.
It was the yo gavel gavel music.
This is a little bit of a curveball episode. So today I'm going to take 3 famous sayings or things that have become commonplace to say in the English language and give you the 3 origin stories of those sayings, one of which is a lie.
I'm in.
So,
Like, what the?
no, that's a...
What the?
What the?
2000's called.
It's a Budweiser commercial.
Dude,
That's what it is.
Dude, I'm getting Adele.
Dude, you're getting yeah.
Dude, you're getting
But
Adele?
these aren't commercials. You've done all commercials so far. These are things you would actually say in real life. Would you like to hear the 3
So
things?
easy a caveman can do it?
Still commercials.
Okay, sorry.
No one out Pizza's the Hut.
The first one.
you're here, your family.
The first one is eating good in the neighborhood. Oh, man. So here are the 3. The first one is read the riot act. He read the riot act to them. Second one is paint the town red. Paint the town red. And the third is turn a blind eye. Turn a blind eye. Those are the 3 phrases that I have 3
I'm
stories
going to go
for.
with eat fresh for 500. Eat fresh for 500.
Eat fresh is not an option.
Okay. What do you think?
I say we go with paint the town blind.
Paint the town red.
red.
You going to say paint the town blonde?
No, blind?
Blind. I thought you
I
said
got
blonde.
confused. I got mixed up. It's paint the
Is
red
there a
town.
saying?
Paint the town
Town
red.
red.
Paint the red town. Paint
Turn
the
a
red
blind
town.
eye.
Turn a blind eye, and then
right.
the last one was read them the right.
Reading the Riot Act.
Got
That's
it.
right.
Lots
Which
of
one would you like to
rereads.
hear?
I'd like paint the town red. I like
Paint
that.
the town
Paint
red.
the town red. Let's
All
do
right.
it.
Coincidentally, it's the only of the three stories that takes place in good old United States of America. So,
That's the way to start things off.
okay, so for each of these, story one begins right now. So for each of these sayings, I'm going to give you the definition as Googled for Wikipedia, dictionary.com, wherever I could find the easiest definition. The definition of paint the town red as used in modern day English is to go out and enjoy yourself flamboyantly or over the top in the means in which you enjoy yourself.
Really, just my life.
Just
in general. It's
you
really.
paint the town red every day.
I do.
Just towns covered in red.
Yeah.
You ever painted the town red?
Once, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Wouldn't recommend it. Too much paint.
It was a lot more work than
Was
I
it
thought.
oil based or latex based?
It was oil based,
Okay.
and you know
That's
how
tough
it gets
to get out.
everywhere,
Yeah,
and then
you
I
can't
don't
get
do
it
a good
out.
job edging.
Forget about it.
It's tough. So this story takes place during the second Red Scare during United States history. Now, Brand, you know all about the second Red Scare, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're such a second Red Scare
Yes,
historian.
yes.
Just tell me, like, what era,
well-
what years we're talking about.
Listen, 1912.
Oh, but that's close to the first Red Scare. You weren't-
1939.
close. Do you know when the second Red Scare was?
1954 through 1968.
You're close. It actually starts
That's a long
winding
scare.
down around 54. It's 1947 to 1960, but really
That's
it's
a long
1947
scare.
through 1954.
It was
So,
terrifying.
Why were people so afraid?
it's a great question. So starting in 1947, really starting in 1945, we start the Cold War, which is a war that doesn't have any actual action between the Soviet Union and the United States. Is it more complicated than that? Yes, it is. Do we actually fight wars during the Cold War in Korea and in Vietnam that are supposed to kind of echo back to communism versus capitalism? Absolutely. But the main granddaddy of them all for 45 years is the Cold War, which is the Soviet Union and the United States fighting for basically world supremacy through ideology. They're fighting for an idea of capitalism, democracy, communism. At one point, we have the Iron Curtain, where we help fund Europe through money to keep communism from spreading. There's a threat of nuclear weapons being built. There's a threat of atomic weapons being built. So in 1947, people start to become very scared of the takeover of communism, that communism will spread across the world and the United States will be communist. And that is terrifying to most red-blooded Americans who have democracy deep in their veins and in their soul. The first Red Scare is very similar. It's after the end of World War I because of the Bolshevik Revolution. There's a scare of communism as well. And red is synonymous with communist. We could get into that, but we're not gonna. So basically the reason this amps up is because there are threats about atomic weapons being tossed back and forth. And communism starts, the fear of communism starts to spread. There are communist spies among us. But when it really takes off is during the formation of the HUAC. Anybody with me on the HUAC?
Oh, I'm a big fan of them.
HUAC! The HUAC is the House Un-American Activities Committee. So that is the House of Representatives has a committee designed to find people who claim to be Americans that are un-American and investigate them. The guy who helps with that committee is and works in conjunction with that committee is a senator. He's a Republican from Wisconsin. His name is Joseph McCarthy, and he becomes infamous in the 1950s for something called McCarthyism, which basically Joseph McCarthy would say, I have the names of 200 communists, 300 communists, and these people are walking amongst us. He accused some very high-ranking officials of being communists. He accused Harry Truman being a communist, Douglas MacArthur, who was like big-time general, of being a communist. So all of these people are being accused of being communists. Well, it turns out that Joseph McCarthy was a fraud. He didn't have many names. He could make very little connections, but during the period of the second Red Scare, if you had even gone to a house party where someone was a communist and could be connected in any way, shape, or form, it was not good for you, right? If you were labeled a communist in Hollywood, it was tough to get work. If you were working, if you were a student, it was tough to get into college. All of those things were made possible because of McCarthyism in the second Red Scare. So in 1954, after some bad press and McCarthy realizing he could not produce the names that he said he could produce, the Senate votes to censure McCarthy or silence his investigation. And it's only one of a handful of senators that have ever been censured by the body they represent. So how does this have anything to do with Paint the Town Red? People were still afraid of communism.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
How does this have anything to do with Paint the Town Red?
That's a great question,
Thank you.
Bran. So people were still afraid of communism, but the Red Scare began to die down after the censuring of Joseph McCarthy. And so around college campuses in the late 1950s, people started to host Red parties. And it was very much a mockery of the Red Scare in general. So these were college students who were at mostly state colleges who basically started to have these parties where everyone faked out like they're a communist, right? Mm. They would show up and wear red. They would dress like Stalin. They would dress like, whomever. It would be a big fun thing that they used to do throughout
People's
history.
definition of fun was different back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, and also colleges had a history of holding offensive parties. So like this was offensive because Stalin killed millions of people and you were dressing as him for a laugh. But like, race relations weren't great in the 50s. There were a lot of college parties that were not great in that regard. And college parties still get in trouble from time to time, like nowadays.
Shocking.
Believe it or not. So these parties became popular in the late 50s. The majority of these parties involved people making fun of communists, dressing up as Stalin or Lenin or just wearing red. As you can imagine, some of these parties would get out of hand. And as coincidence would have it, one such party in 1958 was held at the University of Wisconsin, which is the state that who is from, Joseph McCarthy. And it took a life of its own as drunken college students ran through the streets of Madison in the middle of the night, leaving red paint on many of the businesses, train tracks, and roadways in the city. People woke up the next morning to red paint everywhere around the town. The students were never apprehended, and the party made national news, and the slogan basically caught on from there. Wow. So these drunken college students, the Red Party gets away. They start to paint some of Madison red in some of the business sectors. That is story number one. Your 3 minutes of questions starts right now.
Joseph McCarthy, I've got some questions about him. Being censured.
Yes.
Talk me through what happens. What's the process?
I wish I knew more. But to be censured means that you're silenced or it's a formal punishment from the Senate body. So it does not happen often.
So you cannot go make any...
It's an official slap on the wrist for your actions and what you've done. And Joseph McCarthy actually died 3 years later. He died in 57.
So he was pretty upset.
Yeah. His whole life was built around this. He was also an alcoholic, which coincidentally a lot of people, men in power in the 1800s, alcoholics.
Let me ask you this. Painting the Town Red, the saying has withstood the test of time. We hear it today. Mm-hmm. Have there been other situations where towns have literally been painted red?
So I don't know if a town has ever been painted red. I'm sure there were some copycats after this, but what I can tell you is that doing this was an idea I had for these sayings. Doing the research has resulted in a lot of these sayings have origins that are debated upon. Like, no, this person came up with it. This person came up with it.
Is there any other college that might be responsible for this, or is it?
This is one of the easiest ones to document because it made national news. So because they actually painted Madison, Wisconsin, could it have happened somewhere else? Could some drunk college kids somewhere else had some red paint on them? Yeah, they could. But you can find pictures of red parties if you Google it that will show you, like, they're mostly black and white photos, but they'll show you that they would paint themselves on a regular basis as part of these parties.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so this party got out of hand because there's a bunch of kids dressed as Lenin, Stalin, a bunch of the commies. Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. Alcohol's why it got out of hand, though. I just want to make sure we're clear.
No,
it wasn't the red didn't.
Red didn't get out of hand.
They took the theme too far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the worst Halloween outfit you've ever seen?
Ooh. Oh, that's a tough one.
How hard was it to get to paint? Like, was the town red for a long time?
No. They could. I mean, the city. I don't actually know the answer. I would assume it wasn't red for a long time.
What type of paint was it?
I think it was oil based. I don't think latex based existed in the 1950s.
Lead.
Oil based or lead based.
Oh, they're the same thing.
I don't know if they're the same or not. Maybe it's lead based. I know latex didn't exist back then.
I'm out of questions.
We good?
I have one more.
Okay.
And it's, if you were to paint a town any color, what color would you paint it and why?
I would paint it like a nice teal, and then it would be ready for any green screening or underwater movie that needed to be shot there. If it was an underwater town.
That's really nice.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right. Story number 1's done. Mm-hmm. Question time is done. We have 2 left. We have Turn a Blind Eye, and we have Reading the Riot Act. Which would you like to hear?
That one was interesting. I feel like Turn a Blind Eye is going to be kind of a little boring.
I'm afraid it might be offensive.
Turn a Blind Eye is boring.
Okay.
So let's turn a blind eye middle, and then let's go back to riots.
So we're not
for
gonna,
a big hoopla at the end.
Hoopla at the end. We're not going to turn a blind eye to the blind eye right now. We're going to go with the blind eye.
Right.
So you want to hear the story about Turn a Blind Eye?
The blind eye. Yes.
Okay. Very well. Turn a Blind Eye story number 2 begins right now. Now, the definition of turn a blind eye is pretty simple. It's to pretend not to notice. It's to know something's going on, but to let it happen anyway. That's the definition of turn a blind eye. Now, what if I told you that we get to talk about the Battle of Copenhagen in 1801?
Sign me up.
I wouldn't be surprised.
No, you wouldn't be. Of course not.
No, that's no logical starting point.
Now, the 2 things that you know a lot about, Bran, are the Second Red Scare and the Battle of Copenhagen in 1801. Can you tell me the 2...
I don't like to brag.
Okay, the 2 basically warring belligerents or parties during the Battle of Copenhagen.
The Irish?
No. Believe it or not. You want to take a stab at it?
The Irish.
I don't think it was the Irish. I'm going to go it was the Russians.
The Russians were involved. Yeah, they were.
And
what about the French?
The Germans.
No. It was
Copenhagen.
So Copenhagen's in Denmark. And technically Danish people were involved, but they were kind of casualties of the situation. They were not the 2 main ones involved.
Okay.
So 1801, let me paint the picture for you just to start off. The United States has successfully gained its independence from Great Britain. At the time, France sees the success in the late 1700s of the United States. And what do? They declare they have the French Revolution, which is a little bit harder to pin down because it's not as specifically led as the United States one. You have a lot of changeover in leadership. You have the Jacobins, the Girondins, you have Maximilian Robespierre, the Committee of Public Safety, and you have Napoleon. You have a lot of different things going on. But throughout that, there is a desire to expand empire as those French Revolutionary Wars are happening. And so France is now at war somewhat with England. Now, England's big advantage over France is they have the best navy in the world. That is a thing that Britain has always bragged about and has by and large been true for most of modern history. England's navy reigned supreme, specifically in Europe. And one way that they hurt France was they cut off trade with France, and all of their allies were not supposed to trade with France. You with me so far?
So far.
I'm with you so far.
What does that have to do with Copenhagen? Well, Russia was supposed to be an ally of England at the time. But the Russian Tsar, and I don't remember his name, I think it's Tsar Peter, but I'm not 100%, created a League of Neutrality that allowed for Russia, Prussia, Denmark, and Sweden to all trade freely with France. Oh, snap. That's supposed to be England's ally. They're
claiming neutrality.
They're basically, when it comes to trade, because it's hurting their commerce, they want to trade with France. Now, basically, Russia had previously been an ally to England, and this angered England greatly. With trade, especially through sea travel, was their strength because of their navy. Now, a battle is going to take place at Copenhagen because that is right on the shore of Denmark, and that is where a big port is. And England feels as though they need to go to this League of Neutrality and go, hey, you're supposed to be our allies, so we're going to fight you over you trading with France. So they show up. There's one guy in charge. He's the admiral. His name's Admiral Parker. The guy who's second in command, vice admiral, his name is Horatio Nelson. He becomes famous because of this battle. Now, couple things you need to know about Horatio Nelson. First of all, he did not believe they should fight in Copenhagen. He thought it was a waste of time. He thought they should go straight to Russia. Let's leave the Danes and the Swedes out of this, right? But he was the vice admiral, so he had to do what he was told. That's one. Two, his ship was the lead ship in the skirmish. So they had 4 or 5 ships surrounding the coast there. His ship was the lead ship. The guy in charge, Admiral Parker, was standing on a ship further away, trying to watch from a distance. And third, Horatio Nelson's left eye, is blind. He cannot see out of that eye. It's important that you know those 3 things.
I get it.
Okay.
I get
so,
it.
You see where this is going?
Skirmish starts. gun smoke everywhere. They're firing from the shore of Copenhagen. England is firing back at this new. It's not just the Danish people. They're also the whole neutrality group is, and Admiral Parker cannot see because of the gun smoke everything that is going on. 2 of his boats send a flare up for, I don't know if it was a flare. They send a signal, because I don't know if flares existed back then. They send a signal, a distress signal, that they're in trouble. Admiral Parker can see that. He cannot see anything else. Horatio Nelson has not sent up a signal. He is fighting as he's been told to fight, and he's commanding all the other ships in that area. So Admiral Parker sees these distress signals, and he gives the order for Horatio Nelson to retreat with all of his boats. You must retreat. You have to come back. And then it's Horatio Nelson's job, since he's in the middle of all of this, to tell all the other boats they need to retreat. Well, Horatio Nelson did not want to be there, but he 100% wants to finish this fight. He understands now that they're in it. They have to finish it. And so his flag bearer, who's in charge of throwing the flag up, the white flag up for them to retreat, he tells his flag bearer, they told us to retreat. Don't tell anyone else that. I'm going to look again through my telescope to make sure I've understood the order right. And upon the second time putting the telescope, or whatever this thing is, up to his eye, he puts it up to his left eye and then says, I've seen nothing, so we are not retreating. I've seen nothing, so we're not retreating. So he legitimately knows what he's supposed to do, knows the thing that's supposed to happen. He says, look, I looked through the telescope again. I couldn't confirm that signal was being sent. And so they continued to fight. The British go on to heroically win the battle. And to the end of his dying days, Horatio Nelson claims that it's the greatest victory he ever gained for the British Army or Navy. That is the end of story number 3. Your 3 minutes of questions start right now.
That was boring.
You see, I disagree.
No, you were locked in.
Yeah, no, I mean, it had an admiral, it had a war, I mean, a water war.
The problem is, Bran, if it's not like the Muppets, you're bored. Maybe if we had like a number of the day, could we do that?
Are you telling me there is going to be a Muppets episode?
There is not
up?
that I know of.
How blind was he?
So blind.
So what ends up, give me the larger perspective of what ends up happening with this trade situation. Russia, I'm assuming, recants the web of neutrality.
Well, the web of neutrality. What are you talking about? What is this, sci-fi movie?
Web neutrality.
Of neutrality.
The short version is I don't know 100% what happens next. I do know that the British and Soviets, or the British and Russians, do not stay allies throughout the 1800s. And I do know that this was a fairly big part of it, but I also know that France is by and large unsuccessful in Napoleon's campaigns to expand their empire. So that's all I really can tell you.
How tricky is trade?
It's pretty tricky. It's tricky like that, that trade. It's just difficult. Even today, I mean, the United States is facing all kinds of trade problems because our president's going in a trade war with China and with other countries. A lot of tariffs is hurting soybean farmers and other people. But so trade has always been a big part of United States and really European history.
Cost of tofu is getting out
of hand. Can't even go buy a...
Can't get a mound of tofu.
No, not a firm one.
A mound of it.
Nope.
Silken tofu is disgusting.
It's not my favorite. I don't have any other questions.
You got anything
else?
It
was smoky, you say?
Smoky.
How long did that smoke?
I have no idea.
Okay. I think that's it.
That's it. All right. Very good. Okay. So we got one more story. You guys ready? Have you processed? You ready to go?
I think we're ready. I don't know how you're going to top that one, Dan, because let me tell you, Copenhagen.
Yeah.
And I stand by that was.
It's a fun story. I think see the problem is that as a history guy, pretty much everything I'm going to tell you I think is interesting.
You guys remember a few weeks ago when we talked about aliens and Bigfoot?
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah,
I can't wait for that.
Yeah,
to happen.
How are you feeling about your streak to December?
Oh well, no, I'm still.
Oh, you're all in.
I want to thank my mom. I'm still in.
Doing shout outs and everything. Okay.
All right.
What's this?
Read them the Riot Act.
Read them the Riot Act.
That's right. Okay, story 3 starts right now. Okay, so read the Riot Act. The definition is to reprimand, censure, McCarthy, or give a stern, sharp warning. So reading the Riot Act means, hey, you did something you shouldn't have. Now you're going to get the Riot Act read to you. What if I told you there was an actual Riot Act that was read to the citizens of England beginning in the 1700s?
I'd be in.
You'd be all in, I'm sure. So England during the 1700s is continuing to expand their empire. They hold territories and sometime in the 1700s, England holds territories in Europe, Asia, North America, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, among others. It's a massive sea to shining sea empire. So riots were a fairly commonplace tool of the commoners during 17 and 1800s. In fact, you can go and look up riots that happened in the United States as well and during the colonies that were a part of, the class structure was a lot different then than it is now. So class, some people will be like, hey, we're mad about this. The only thing we know how to do is to loot, run in the streets, show our anger. There's no other way that we can show that aside from we don't have the money, but we can go and burn stuff to the ground. So riots were fairly common. One reason they were fairly common in England is because the balance of power in England would shift back and forth between Parliament and the king on a regular basis. In the 1600s, the British had a civil war with the Stuart dynasty. One king lost his head. There was always this back and forth over how much power the king should have. And in the 1700s, we have the colonies starting to revolt. And so the idea of a riot or a mob mentality is fairly common, especially within English American lifestyle. Not a unusual thing at all. In the late 1700s, there was some sort of riot or unrest at virtually every major public function in London. So if somebody came out with something in London that the government was doing, there were some people that disagree with it. You with me, Bran?
I'm with you.
Perfect. So King George I of Hanover takes over for the Stuart dynasty in 1714. Okay. He immediately asked Parliament to pass a law called the Riot Act law. They do it. It's signed into law in the summer of 1715. Now,
good year.
It's called the Riot Act. That's what it's called. And here's what the Riot Act says. If a group of 12 or more people are gathered together and show signs of unruliness, anger that could lead to a riot, an officer, I'm not reading the actual act, I'm reading a summary. Yeah. An officer would then be allowed to read the Riot Act and would be encouraged to do so in a booming or big voice. Now, do I have the Riot Act? I sure do. Would you like to hear what they're supposed to read?
I sure need it.
This is I wouldn't know if it's true or not.
This is the pre-Miranda rights. So this is kind of the idea of reading someone their rights. So they're starting to form. There's 12 or more of them. Things are starting to get out of hand. Any officer of the court was supposed to read this and get on top of something and scream it as loud as they could, which I will not do at this present time. Our sovereign Lord the King chargeth and commandeth all persons being assembled immediately to disperse themselves and peaceably to depart to their habitations, to their lawful business, upon the pains contained in the act made in the first year of King George for preventing tumults and riotous assemblies. God save the king. Now, it is at this point that they would put the riot on the clock. Kid you not.
On the clock?
On the clock.
So they have a time limit.
They have a time limit. Here's what that means.
It's a shot clock.
It's kind of a shot clock because once the officer of the court had read the Riot Act, then all participants had 1 hour to disperse back to their place of business or their home. 1 hour to disperse. So if any participant were still there and caused what was deemed by the officer of court to be a riotous action, they were arrested and with a felony, and the punishment was death. So if the Riot Act was read, and then after an hour people were still there, they could be arrested and put to death by the government. That's the Riot Act. Now, if the crowd didn't listen, which, here's the thing, crowds would get big enough that they would think the Riot Act was funny. In the late 1700s, it became more of a laughing matter than anything. But if the crowd didn't listen, which was often the case, the officer could enlist citizens to help control the crowd in order to calm them down. But no felony arrest could be made until an hour time period was done. So they could arrest them, but they could not arrest them with a felony charge until the hour was done. So that means that if the riot starts, he could enlist you if you're just standing there. Hey, you got to come help deal with this. Because of almost constant class conflict, in England during the time. The Riot Act was used often, and by the 1800s, it was used on a monthly, if not weekly basis in England, primarily in London. In the early 1900s, it was repealed. But it was, by the 1800s, the Riot Act was more effective at riling up a crowd than it was at settling it down. It became almost a joke, and that's why parents became able to read the Riot Act to their kids when originally it was punishable by death. That is story numero tres. Your 3 minutes of questioning starts right now.
So they have an hour.
1 hour.
After the Riot Act is read to disperse.
That's right.
I would imagine, like, if it was me, that I would be like, man, I have an hour to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that hour really was used to cause even more of a ruckus.
Seems like a loophole.
So
but
why not just say,
I
hey,
think
we're
the
done?
hour was to justify the death punishment. So you could be arrested before an hour,
Oh, so they could arrest
but you could not be charged with a felony punishable
So if
by
they
death.
saw you
basically
lighting
it's
a
like-
house on fire, they
Yeah.
would say, we were arresting you,
Yes.
but because it was not after
Yeah.
an hour, you're not going to die.
You guys are in a big ruckus and you're letting it get the mob mentality get the best of you. The Riot Act is read. That doesn't mean you have an hour to do whatever you want. It means you have an hour to stop and calm down. If you do anything, you can be arrested, but after that hour, it's punishable by death.
Whose kingship was this under?
King George I of Hanover. So he's the first Hanoverian king. So the Stuart dynasty lasts from roughly 1607, 1606 to 1714. Hanoverian kings start. That's the same group that was King George III, who was the revolutionary.
How many people died because of the Riot Act? Is there are there people on record who died?
Yes, there
as
are
a
people on the
punishment?
record. I did not look up the total because we're talking about an act that was around for 200 years.
Right.
So I did not look up a total.
So when did this stop being a thing?
Early 1900s, like 1915. Yeah. Almost exactly 200 years.
What's the biggest riot? What's the most damage to ever happen because of a riot? Do we know?
That's a great question. I mean, you know, in the United States, the Haymarket Square riot is a big one. The Pullman Railroad strike riot is a really big one. I'm trying to think of in England.
When I think of a riot today, I think of a lot more of people on a street tipping over cars, lighting things on fire.
Yeah.
Is
Are
that-
riots always
looting.
violent?
I would say by and large they're violent. Yeah. I would. Oh, that's not good. When I think of riot, I actually think of Carmen's righteous invasion of truth.
That's such a good riot.
Well, I think my last question would be this. You said that there was a lot of riots going on. With every little thing that was happening, they would riot over.
So-
at a certain point, there's no more town to riot.
Well,
So,
I think it's more indicative of the time period of the turnover. So, like, England is the first country to really have this social contract with people and the government. And this shows you the tumultuous nature of that contract, right? So it wasn't like every time the king announced anything, there was a riot because Parliament had as much control as the king, but it was anytime there was some sort of showcase of that.
was this king well liked, or did this kind of putting the riot act in place? Did it kind of ruin anything he had with the people?
King George I was, I don't remember him being any ridiculously more or less like than a King George III or any of the other Hanoverian kings. And that's all the time we have in that 3 minutes. Boys, it's conference time. Streak on the line. The three stories.
Yeah.
Read the riot act, paint the town red, turn a blind eye.
I know what one I'm picking.
You're not going to say anything. I thought you guys were supposed to confer.
Yeah. What are you thinking?
I have a suspicion that one of them is wrong.
Nailed it.
We want to play this one close to the vest
Yeah.
because this really could break it wide open for me today.
It really
Dan.
could break it wide open.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
so
so
we have this time where you guys are supposed to confer, and what you're saying is that
It gets tricky.
your personal game
Yes.
is more important than the segment.
Riot act sounds fishy.
Yeah. Yeah. Painting the town red sounds fishy.
And
The blind eye
The
just
blind
sounds
eye's-
boring.
sounds fishy.
Maybe I bored you into.
All right.
All right, are you guys ready?
I'm ready.
Are you
I'm
ready?
going to go.
Go ahead.
You want me to go first?
Go ahead.
I do not think that painting the town red is a true story.
You do not think painting the town red is a true story?
Oh, it's so hard. I hate this game. Man, this is tough. I'm going to go with turning a blind eye.
You don't think turning a blind
eye is the true story.
Okay.
Is somebody right?
One of you guys is right.
Oh, snap!
It's Pandolph.
Yeah! I did it! I did it!
Pandolph
Big
again.
Bang Bong.
Painting the town red. They don't know exactly the origin, but most people point to this town in Ireland in 1837 where two brothers basically got drunk and just went nuts on the town.
I love them though.
The red scare, all that with the none of that. Like I made up. Obviously, the second red scare is true. Everything else about that story about Madison, Wisconsin, red parties, all made up.
There's no red parties?
Red parties didn't happen. None of that happened.
No one dressed up as Lennon and...
No, I'm sure someone did somewhere. The other two stories completely factual and really fascinating in my opinion. Both of them are.
Yeah.
So
I want to know a little bit more information about there was two guys who painted literally the town red.
yeah, let me look it up. I don't think they actually painted the town red. I think they just
Were riotously
and that's
drunk.
what that whoever reported the story said that. I guess I don't know.
Someone should have read them the riot act.
And then instead, somebody turned the blind eye.
Man, wow. So you had a streak.
Yeah, I'll say
and
this.
the
I
streak
think,
never started.
I think my streak starts next week.
You were mistaken. Because right now it's 3-1.
Yeah, it's 3-1. Yeah, I don't know, man.
Wow.
It's tough. Next week we have a special guest, which will really throw things off.
Man.
So I don't even know. I don't
Wow.
even know anymore.
Man, I tell you what, guys, it's been fun.
It's been fun.
As always. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to rate, review, subscribe, like all that fun stuff. If you have any questions, you can email us. Right now, just email us at dan@deckthehallmark.com.
Okay, yeah,
And
yeah.
speaking of Deck the Hallmark,
We are right in the middle of
we're
our
right in the
marathon.
middle of watching a bunch of Christmas movies and reviewing each and every one of them for your listening pleasure. If you're interested in any of that, now's the time. Go check out Deck the Hallmark. And if you have a question or if I got something wrong, email me, dan@deckthehallmark.com. Thanks again for listening. And as we always say around here,
If it's not history, it's his story. TM.
all right.
That was fun.